Okay, Chair, we're live.
Thank you very much, Van. I would like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting of July 5th, 2021 to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Micklet, Counselor and Chair of the Planning and Economic Development Committee. We are meeting electronically through Zoom during this declared emergency period. Members of the public may observe the proceedings by accessing the live webcast at our YouTube channel. Roll call. I will ask our Deputy Clerk to complete a roll call of council so that we can confirm quorum. Devan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor Easton? Thank you. Councillor Regima?
I'm here. Thank you.
Councillor Bernay?
Here.
Councillor Pachariva?
Here.
Councillor McPherson?
Here.
Councillor Micklick?
Here.
Councillor Timmers?
Here.
Councillor Reimer?
Here.
And Councillor Russell is absent from today's meeting and sends his regrets, but we do have quorum.
Thank you very much. In addition, I want to take a moment to welcome the staff we have joining us today electronically. Director of Finance and Administration and Innovation, Lawrence Wagner. Director of Planning and Development, Matt Bruder, also will be acting CAO for this evening's meeting. Director of Special Projects, Kathleen Dale. Director of Economic Development and Communications, Paul Deaney. Director of Public Works, David Graham. Fire Chief, Greg Hudson. Deputy Fire Chief, Bill Blake. CEO, Public Library, Lincoln Public Library, Julie Andrews. And moderating and clerking the meeting today, we have our Deputy Clerk, Devan Crick. IT is also in attendance. As this is a virtual meeting, I will ask we follow some procedures during this electronic meeting. Should there be a connection or service disruption for the chair, or if quorum is lost, the chair and or deputy clerk will call a 10-minute recess to reconnect and regain quorum. If quorum is lost, the meeting will be adjourned. If connection is lost from the chair, the deputy clerk will ask those in attendance to wait up to 10 minutes to provide the chair time to reconnect and resume the meeting. Otherwise, after that time frame, the vice chair will resume the meeting until the chair has reconnected and resumes their role. Each member of council who wishes to speak, press the raise hand feature on your video call, and the deputy clerk will track our speakers list today and then invite you to speak when I open it for comments or questions. Also, when I finish reading a motion and announcing the mover, the deputy clerk will then call out the vote by reading each member of council's name out loud. Please remember to take yourselves off mute during this portion of the meeting so that you can confirm if you support or oppose. Also, when not speaking, please remember to put yourselves on mute. Declarations of interest. Is there any declarations of interest this evening? Seeing none. Confirmation of the agenda. Do any members have any amendments to the order of the agenda? Seeing none. Statutory public meetings. We have no statutory public meetings this evening. Now we come to the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. 6.1 delegations. There are no registered delegations this evening for the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. 6.2 consent agenda. We are now considering item 6.2, the consent agenda, inclusive of item 6.2.1, Municipal Heritage Citizen Advisory Committee meeting minutes of May 13th, 2021. Would any member of council like to remove this item from the consent agenda to discuss? There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Timmers that council receive and file for information the consent agenda inclusive of item 6.2.1, Municipal Heritage Citizen Advisory Committee minutes of May 13th, 2021. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bernay?
Yes.
Councillor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Micklick?
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Regima?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
And Mayor Easton? Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Okay, moving on to reports, we will now consider item 6.3.1, report PD-22-21 regarding review of draft policies of the Niagara official plan. We'll have Mr. Bruder speak to this, if you may.
Thanks, Counselor. And good evening, everybody. And just kind of touching on this report very briefly, what it does is it outlines some of the key policy considerations that have been undertaken to date by the region in their overall review and update of their official plan. Very comprehensive process, something they haven't undertaken in a long, long time. So definitely something that they've been wrapped up with for a little while now and involving the town on very frequent basis on. Some of the key items in it are, again, looking at some of the natural heritage and natural environment protection policies in there. Also looking at some of the growth projections and land needs assessment for the overall region, how it's broken down, and the report highlights how it pertains to Lincoln specifically in terms of overall population growth, and then broken down further in terms of different areas in town, whether it be greenfields, whether it be built up area, and households as well, looking at that and the breakdown. And then also getting into some other policies pertaining to a little bit of agriculture infrastructure and looking at these in draft form. And I would highlight too that this is still pretty early in the process. This is kind of our first kick at the can in terms of providing comments on these. There's going to be further opportunities for public input and agency input and municipal input like ours going forward. But initial comments are what we've outlined in the report, and I'm happy to take any questions on them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. Yeah, that regional report was over 250 pages of data. Appreciate you summarizing it, you and your staff, into 19 pages for us to peruse and go over. And I will now ask if there's any, do members of council have any questions? I see Councillor Rinciana's hand is up. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about on page 7 of the recommendation report, under the heading built up area, at the bottom of the page, the report says that the region is seeking to exceed the 50% intensification requirement with a regional intensification rate of 56%, because a higher intensification rate reduces the overall community area land need. Can you expand on that a little bit and explain what the goal of that is? Is it to have more land available for employment needs?
Bruder?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good question, Councillor. What that is that's just, the 50% target that's identified in provincial policy, that is a minimum as well. The region's trying to go above and beyond that in recognition as it pertains to more provincial policy, even in a broad sense, that more efficient use of land should be undertaken when development occurs, especially, when we look at our urban areas and our major intensification corridors and whatnot. So really what the region's trying to achieve there is to kind of focus growth in the urban areas where it can be accommodated in a little bit more of a compact built form than even perhaps that minimum 50% would otherwise accommodate. So, is it necessarily to provide employment lands? No, I think employment lands too would be considered in the same vein, more or less, because now we're seeing mixed use developments on the rise. So it's more about making better use and more efficient use of available land that can accommodate development.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pachariva, I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Chair McCulloch. Just a quick question to Mr. Bruder, and I know that a couple of times we've looked at opportunities on squaring off our municipal boundaries, because when the Greenbelt was instituted in 2005, we never really had that chance. And, with Deputy Blake here this evening and Mr. Graham, so we've got a dead-end water service on Aberdeen and we've got a dead end on Hillside. If we were able to link those two together and loop them, it would solve a lot of problems of dead-end water mains, also help with firefighting. So you can't extend those services in the Greenbelt, and that little bit is identified as Greenbelt. So Any thoughts, like, are we going to go to the region? I mean, we've got the same issue on Lincoln Avenue with the Beamsville Bite. So, and that's taking in, part of the Go Transit lands and the study there. So going to the region to say, can you advocate for this, small boundary adjustment from, a water safety, water protection, fire services. There's a lot of boxes that you can check on this. So just your thoughts, Mr. Bruder, on that. If they would then advocate for us.
Bruder?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and through you to the counselor. Yeah, definitely. Just last week, I had met with the regional staff. Ms. Dale and myself have done some work to kind of look at some of the technical rounding off as the boundaries, as you would say. They are doing a review exercise now.
Mm-hmm.
We have identified even some of the examples that you stated. Now, I think other than the very technical and the very, very minor adjustments, it's still going to be difficult to get them through. We did, talk about some of the larger ones. Even another one that comes to mind is the Greenbelt line that bisects, let's just say, for example, Jordan Public School. Doesn't really make a lot of sense either.
Yeah.
We've identified all of these with the region. We've been talking about them for a while, but although they say they will advocate, on our behalf, they kind of haven't given us any commitments to date, but those conversations continue. But they are undertaking kind of a technical boundary adjustment exercise as well as part of this whole regional official plan update. So we have been communicating on that. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Through you, Chair Mikulak. That's great to hear, Matt. And even if we can't get the ultimate, the panacea would be the boundary adjustment, but the ability to link those two dead end services, and as well, we've got the same issue with with the Beacon lands and that when we look at the whole Prudence corridor, right? I see Kathleen nodding, right? Yeah, and there's not much you can do with that. So okay, if you just continue to push, guys, and appreciate it, and maybe they'll hear us. So thank you. Thanks, Chair Mikulak.
Thank you for the question. I believe it was Councilor Brunei. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Mikulak. Through you to Mr. Bruder. I have a few questions. Matt, with regards to the report, in the report, it states a number of times that these draft policies and sections of the official plan development are not completely fulsome, as it is still very much in the early process. I'm wondering if you could kind of explain that process as it relates to us as a council, and how important it is that we as a council convey to staff so that information can be conveyed back to the region. Any concerns we have at any point. I'm wondering if you could just explain to us as that relates to council.
Bruder.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, good question for sure. I think it's just at the point where, it's such a fulsome review and comprehensive, they're essentially creating a new official plan, and there's a lot that goes into it. So they're tackling some of the initial policies initially. I know they were under a little bit of a time crunch with respect to the natural environment policy specifically. So some of them have come forward sooner than others. They gave us a deadline for the ones that are available now to provide our initial commentary, which is what we're bringing forth before you today. So, we're going to continue to do so as these policies come forward. Staff will definitely, we'll review them first through our lens in terms of how we look at these and how they would be implemented Lincoln specific. But we also, we want to be able to provide you with that commentary every step of the way as these new policies come out in draft form. So you can have an opportunity to review the ones that we've just reviewed, and then we can have this fulsome discussion and then unify the comments and send them off. And also, obviously, wanting to keep you up to date too for any potential opportunities for you to be involved. And maybe communicate directly with the region as well, as they've done that already previously. So I hope that answers your question, Councillor.
Through you, Chair, it does, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because I prefaced the question with, it was a perfect segue, so I appreciate you bringing that up, because I have a concern, and I have a respect that as regional councillors, they have a responsibility to not only look at municipal concerns for the municipality in which they've been elected, but holistically, they have to look at it through the lens of 12 municipalities. And I respect that. But when I see that option 3B on May the 12th was endorsed by the regional counselor, and I read that our town staff is preferring a different option, it sends off bells and whistles with me. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that, Mr. Bruder.
Mr. Bruder?
Certainly. So, we did provide that commentary initially, and where we're coming from on that particular piece is we felt, although we don't feel that it's a bad, idea at all to protect the natural environment system and its linkages, we wanted a little bit more flexibility for us to adjust to local circumstance in the agricultural areas specifically, to adapt, if there's the need, if those linkages are there, sure, let's make sure we protect them. But we didn't want blanket policies on the overarching and a little more stringent side to be applied because, well, like we say, we have a large agricultural land base. But that said, they did go forward rather quickly with that particular one. But as I understand, there was a little bit of a time crunch on their end, not to make any excuses or anything, but we did provide input. And ultimately, it was, and a lot of other municipalities did too. But ultimately, it was concluded that was it bad to include that option? Not necessarily bad. It just might not take into account the local context in certain situations. But going forward, I do expect that we will have more time and more ability to provide input, and then that goes into the regional councilors' decisions. To your point, so.
Okay, through you, Chair Michalak. Thank you, Mr. Bruder, for that. If I could just proceed, Chair, with my second question. Similarly to Councillor Rinjema, I had a question on page 15 with regards to the chart that references the shares of household growth by policy area. And specifically, I just wanted to expand on kind of where Councillor Rinjema was going. So, the province has identified growth with a minimum of 50%. You've spoken to that in terms of new development. The region has said they want to expand on that intensification by going to 56. At what point as a municipality do we say that 80% is too high?
Mr. Bruder, you care to comment on that? 80%?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. It's a good question. I mean, I've said it before, there is a little bit of a balance that goes on here with us. Our intensification rates, and they're always going to be a little bit higher just because of the limited land base on which we have to grow. We don't have a large urban contingent to begin with. But the target, I wouldn't get too focused on the numbers because a lot of the areas where we're going to see the most significant intensification, I think of the Ontario Street Corridor, I think of the GO Transit secondary plan area, the Prudhoe secondary plan area. We've undergone or are undergoing a lot of planning consideration already. We're honing in on those specific areas, knowing that's where a lot of the growth is going to be. So, I don't think we should necessarily be looking at it in terms of, when do we say enough's enough? I think it's, there are factors that play in that definitely help make that determination from a servicing standpoint, those considerations to an urban design and massing standpoint and minimizing those impacts. A lot of that tends to impact a little bit of the intensification that can go on too. There are limitations that happen just by virtue of those considerations. And then when you put in, you add into the consideration of all the secondary planning and the visioning that we're about to embark on our major corridors being Victoria and King and Ontario, all that factors in and I think helps guide the conversation.
Councillor?
Okay, thank you, Matt. Through you, Chair Michalak, I just have one final question, if I could. So, my concern for the last immediate future has been not development for the sake of development, but development and a concern that our infrastructure is in a position to handle the growth, whatever that growth is. If we agree that the population of Lincoln in 2020 is 26,750, if we agree that that is the starting number, this report indicates that by 2051, Lincoln will have 35,660 people. Through you, Chair, to Mr. Bruder, what I don't understand as time goes along is we were told by the region when we had a a virtual meeting with the regional people a couple months ago, that 35,660 target, which albeit would be a growth of about 9,000 people if the 26,750 number is accurate, that includes Prudhome's. So it appears that this is a very, very conservative number, because it seems like every week and every month as we go by, we're learning about a new development. And these new developments weren't in the queue last year, when we were doing our transportation master plan. So I'm just having a real difficult time understanding the numbers and what this all means as we go forward in terms of development and infrastructure, because it seems like the developments keep coming and they weren't considered when we were looking at these numbers. So I'm just really struggling with the fact that these numbers seem to be, at best, very, very conservative. And I'm wondering if Mr. Bruder could comment on that.
Mr. Bruder?
Absolutely. Through you, Mr. Chair. I agree. Councillor, we agree that those numbers are low. So that's some of the commentary that we're going to be providing to the region. Totally agree. I think they are overly conservative. And based on some of the most recent development concepts, even those that we haven't seen any type of application, just some inquiries we've had, I would agree with you. So what we do, when you look at those numbers that the region is allocating growth targets, those are minimum growth targets. It doesn't necessarily mean that the servicing considerations would completely stop there. They do use some of that in their master servicing plan, which is why we want to see it increased. But I can also tell you, we're in constant communication with regional staff, their planning department, their infrastructure team, with respect to the development concepts that we're seeing. Like I said, even those that aren't maybe not even near fruition in the next couple of years, but we see them in the pipeline. So we're communicating, I would say, probably more than we ever have before, because as you referenced, things are happening faster than they did before. So we are providing that information in real time to the region. As it goes with our infrastructure, we exchanged some emails earlier today, Councillor, and we do have a modeling system as well that allows us to input some of these development concepts, include real data in terms of flow monitoring information that we get, and then make a determination to forecast out what types of infrastructure we need. There's going to become a point, there always is, where the infrastructure can only be upgraded so far. And that's some of the conversations that we have with developers as we go on. But at the end of the day, we don't just stop with these overall growth numbers. The communication happens at a much more granular level between us and the region on a consistent basis as well, which also factors into their decision making.
Councillor Brunet?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I appreciate that comment, and I don't want to go beyond my three questions, but I guess I would just thank you for that response, and cognizant we are in constant communication with the region is great. But when we look at major developments like Prudhome's, when we were doing the secondary plan, we were trying to be in discussion with the Ministry of Transportation to look at any necessary improvements, let's say, as an example, that might be required at Victoria Avenue and the interchange at the Queenie. But now you throw in potentially, let's just say 2 26-story buildings with another developer down there. What does that do to the interchange? And I'm hoping that as we're in dialogue with the region, that we're also in dialogue with other agencies and people like the ministry, so that we're making these decisions as these developments come through. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brunet. I'm going to move on. Should you have a further question, I'd welcome you back to ask another question, but I'll move on to Councillor McPherson. Councillor Winchema, I do see your hand is up. However, I'm going to allow Councillor McPherson have the floor at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor Regima. I first would like to make a comment with regards to the proposed transportation policies in the report, and very pleased to see that the region is taking on a complete streets approach, in that they will be looking to design streets considering the needs and safety of all road users, including people who walk, cycle, take transit, or drive. So, really, really good to see that in this this new official plan. And as we know, there are some regional roads that are going to get some regional spending in Lincoln over the next few years, and exciting to see that they're going to take into account everybody that uses those roads, thinking about King Street in Vineland for sure, thinking about the bridge in the Jordan Hollow, and any enhancements that we're doing to the Jordan Hollow and all of our regional roads, down the road. So that is a comment. I guess I spent a lot of time looking at this from the densities and the targets and all that as well. And, I guess the one thing that keeps coming back to me is we see a target from the province. We see a target from the region. Do we have a municipal target? And if we do, maybe we can share that. If we don't, do we need one? Do we need to set, our own target of what we would like for growth? And that may be determined by infrastructure, and at what point does growth start to create a bigger need for infrastructure, and growth potentially maybe doesn't pay for growth when we start getting into that. So it's just a comment around the whole growth piece that's in here. I certainly get that, we're expecting that the Ontario Street GO station area, potential GO station area, and Prudhome's will be the significant contributor to our development and our growth over the next 10 years. But I guess I wonder too, how does other development factor in as we're going along? So maybe that starts to speak to a municipal target, growth target. So that is and maybe Mr. Bruder, or through you, Mr. Chair, if you've got a comment with regard to that, that'd be great.
Sure, I do, Mr. Chair, and thank you. I understand where you're going with that. What we usually do is when we're handed down growth targets, like what's going to happen here, we would look at it in the context of our own official plan as we'd done previously. A lot of the areas, you mentioned the GO Transit secondary plan area, well, we have a specified density in there. There's even some details identified from the province in terms of density figures to hit in that specific area. We reflect those, but also different areas. You mentioned other developments. Usually, and I look at Prudhome's, the secondary plan area, we identify density numbers there, ranges that we would look at and consider. But also in other areas of town too, we have higher density areas and lower density areas. And typically there's density ranges associated with those that help dictate kind of in an area specific basis, how much of a compact built form can happen, among other considerations and policy, of course. But we do touch on some of that already in our official plan. But again, I would be hesitant to when you start talking about numbers in terms of intensification and density, those numbers, in my opinion, can kind of be dynamic over time as well. Things change. Like I said, we don't have a lot of room, but growth is happening, and not just here. I know a lot of other municipalities, they're experiencing growth like they never have before as well. From an infrastructure standpoint, I can tell you it is challenging. But we're using real-time data as quickly as we can to at least forecast when these upgrades that are needed can happen. And then, on that basis, we communicate with the prospective developer. Sometimes maybe, their timelines that they had in mind can't quite be met because, we need to catch up with some of our infrastructure. That happens. It doesn't mean, it necessarily needs to be a no, but it's a consideration. And we're definitely cognizant that that's one that needs to be made throughout the process. So those are some comments that I would make.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Chair, if I could, one more question.
Sure.
And this is, I want to pull Director Deanne into this conversation, and it's with regards to employment. And there's a chart on page 12 of 19 that calls out Lincoln for 4,570, I would assume, new jobs over that period. And I wonder if Mr. Deanne can comment on that. Does that number make sense? Is it significant challenge to us? What are your thoughts around that?
Mr. Deanne, is that total employment or is that new jobs? Can you just for myself as well?
So Chair, through you to the counselor, and looking at the chart, I think it says total employment growth by employment type, counselor. And to Councillor McPherson, I think this is in line with our economic development strategy from a couple of years that really identified growth in our community. As you recall, at the same time as that economic development strategy, we did do an employment needs strategy as well, or study, and that did identify some growth targets as well. So it's good to see these numbers because I think they're updated a little bit, that reflect a little bit higher, but they are definitely in line with what we've seen previously.
Good to hear. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Njama.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is regarding the options for natural heritage. It seems like the difference between option 3B and 3C has a lot to do with linkages within our urban boundary. And I'm not exactly sure what, if we were, let's say we said, well, we're in favor of 3C, we want all those detailed linkages within our urban boundary, large and small. I'm not sure how we would sort of determine what that would look like. Does that show somewhere on a map? If there were a proposed linkage within our urban boundary, what would it look like?
Mr. Bruder.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to be honest, I think that's something that hasn't been completely flushed out in full detail yet. I think a lot of the, like, if, when I think of a linkage in our, our kind of our urban areas, I think some of our creekside, like our creeks are natural areas, some of the floodplain or EC designation that goes through, environmental conservation designation that goes through some of those. But yeah, it really, the difference between 3B and 3C is there's a lot more, it's more stringent with respect to some of the protection requirements and the studies that would be required to support any development in the vicinity of these. So, but to exactly how they'd look in the maps, I'm not exactly sure at this point yet.
Thank you. So questions of clarification, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So if let's say all is final, the official plan is finalized, and option 3B is selected and confirmed and supported on a majority basis. So does that leave us open to be more restrictive at a municipal level?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it still does. The region's been maintaining that from the get-go, saying, yep, here's your baseline protection requirements. If you want to be more stringent as a local municipality, you're able to do so. So that is an option as well for certain features that we would deem it necessary, yes.
Okay, and another question of clarification, Mr. Chair, and then I have one more unrelated question to this one, if you don't mind. So
it's important. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So I'm thinking in particular of a property right now that a residence has been, I'm speaking generally, but it reminds me of a property right now that a resident has questioned me on. And there's a number of very nice trees on this property and currently has no designation or protection in our official plan or zoning bylaw, is my understanding. So, I don't think, it is what it is. It's not protected as far as I can see. There are maybe other tools that we can use in our toolbox to try to preserve those trees and work with the developer. But it's, the fact remains, it's a real shame to lose little spots like that are beautifully treed. They provide shade. They're a beautiful amenity area for any residential or even commercial development. It's just a lovely thing to have. So is this something that when we're reviewing our zoning bylaw, our comprehensive zoning bylaw, are we looking at stuff like that? Is there a way we can sort of further enhance the natural areas within our urban boundary?
Mr. Bruder?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're working on a bunch of, policy documents lately, and even on a tree manual pertaining to trees, but we also consider it as a component of site plans and things like that. Even if there are impacts to the trees on the property, we look to reestablish wherever we can. We require comprehensive landscape plans with pretty much every submission in urban areas. So we look to reestablish a canopy if it's lost, because especially I understand what you're saying in the urban area in particular, it's nice to have tree coverage. So, we're trying to work through our site alteration bylaw too with respect to tree removals as well. So these are some of the tools that we have. So you're right, we do have some tools at our disposal to address situations where there might be trees that come down due to development or due to anything happening on a property.
Okay, so I'm not sure if I heard that we are looking at maybe putting some sort of protection within our zoning bylaw on some areas within the urban boundary. Are we? Sorry if I missed that.
No, and sorry, and through you, Mr. Chair. Well, we'd be looking at it too in terms of some of our zones that are already there. Just respect with some of the EC zones, review that to see if there's any, potential to refine our environmental conservation zone. Yeah, that's definitely part of the zoning review. Okay,
thank you. And then, Mr. Chair, one more question, unrelated, and it's my last question, my third question. Page 15 of the recommendation report under the first heading, proposed archaeological policies. So that's on page 15. So just to recap for anybody who's listening and doesn't have the report in front of them, the region's planning to develop the first region-wide archaeological management plan for Niagara. And the second paragraph of your report says that Lincoln currently requires archaeological assessments and that the decision is based on the potential for archaeological resources. I know some municipalities have a schedule in their official plan that shows the properties that would be automatically subject to an archaeological assessment or at least a high-level review. So the proposal to do this is on a region-wide basis. How do we currently determine whether an archaeological assessment would be required? And do we consult an archaeologist?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So that's actually a regional determination as well. They administer the archaeological requirements on various planning applications. There's criteria, I believe it's in the standards and guidelines for consultant archaeologists from the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport. A couple of them right off the get-go is proximity to a water course. I think anything within 300 meters of any water course, for example, is subject to a screening for archaeological resources because they were often used as transportation corridors, or proximity to other known archaeological areas as well. That's another one that would automatically trigger it. But those are typically criteria that the region apply when we invite them in for a pre-consultation. So the archaeological requirements are addressed through them.
Okay, so, and one question of clarification, Mr. Chair, and then I'm done. So right now the region provides comments and the proposal is to have a master plan. So to review everything region-wide and to map it out.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pachariva, I see your hand is up. Appreciate your patience.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Mikulak. Yeah, I've got some stickies on my pages as reminders, and I had the Aberdeen and Hillside quote there, but then I forgot that I had one further down. So just a question actually to Mr. Bruder and Mr. Deanne. So on page 13 of 19, so where we talk section 4.1.11.12, short-term accommodations shall not exceed 6 bedrooms. So Mr. Deanne, on our trade mission to China and Vietnam, when we met with that industrialist in Shanghai, and she said she wanted to buy Rockaway golf course and vineyard and wanted to turn it into Blue Mountain. So typically that's not allowed, but I appreciate that we're pushing to exceed the 10 to 12 that the region is recommending now. And like, your thoughts, should it not be on a case-by-case basis? Because on these, the Good Earth with the cooking school. Peach Country wanted to do something similar. Like, if it makes sense and they are a bona fide farmer, the target is where they can make money on it, where they can make a profit. So, I mean, if the number's 14, like, it should be reviewed on a case-by-case business or basis. And if there's a business case that supports that number to generate a profit, because profit isn't a dirty word, can we go to bat and say, hey, this is what we should be looking at, right? Because you really pigeonhole, when you put a number on it. And we're going to see that later, with the garden suite. So just, like, if you're one over, then it's not allowed. So just your thoughts.
Mr. Bruder?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Maybe I'll start and Mr. Deaney can chime in after. But the way we were kind of looking at it is, the province has guidelines on permitted uses in prime agricultural areas.
Mhm.
And one of the things we would consider this kind of an agritourism or on-farm diversified use. So it's not bad to have this type of development on an agricultural site. The main thing you have to consider, and what we're trying to say is, instead of this 6-room business, which I'm not even quite sure exactly where that came from, but we want to tie it to the scale of the property, because the primary rationale for any on-farm diversified use, the overall function of the property in a prime agricultural area should be growing or agriculturally oriented. This is kind of tied in with it, but not necessarily relating to that. So, typically for an on-farm diversified use, the percentage given is 5% of a land. Now, that's a guideline. It's not a policy, but we think there should be more consideration and flexibility based on that. Some properties are massive, and if they want to put some of these accommodations on there short term, and there's an ability to privately service these properly without impacting viable agricultural land, then we should be flexible and open to it in our opinion.
Okay.
And if I can jump in as well, Chair.
Oh, sorry,
Thank you. And good question, Councillor. I mean, totally agree with all the statements that both you made and Director Bruder made as well. As you well know, and as members of council well know, I mean, this has been a labor of love for Director Bruder and I for the number of years in regards to getting both the region and the province and such all to the table in seeing sort of this increase. So I'm happy to see that the region has included this. And, as you well know, and as, Director Bruder just alluded to, really, that economies of scale really, is what should be coming into factor. And I'm happy to see that moving forward. But from our tourism perspective, our tourism strategy, which really identified the need for more accommodations in our community to help support our tourism sector. Councillor, you're well aware of that. And I'm happy to see this moving forward. It's going to be great news for our tourism economy here locally. And I know Director Bruder has been working very hard on this as well. So, special shout out to his effort in getting the region moving in this direction. Thank you.
Yeah, and through you, Chair Mick, I really appreciate your work, guys, on this, and Kathleen too, because I mean, we've seen the changing landscape. And if we're going to be a center for excellence in agriculture, that the not only the purse strings need to be untied, but our hands need to be untied, and we need to be able to pivot. We need to be able to bob and weave, and we need to be able to make sense economically for these farmers that this has been thrust upon them. So thank you so much for pushing them. Thank you for getting them to almost double, but keep the pressure on to make it. If a business case supports it, then we should be open for that. And I mean, and I appreciate the part too, where it said the increase in workforce should be, in the ag sector, which will truly allow us to become that center for excellence in agriculture. So the two are tied together. So thank you very much. Thanks, Chair McClurk.
You're welcome. I see Mayor Easton, your hand is up. Questions?
Very much, Mr. Chairman. Reception is a bit sketchy. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to go back to the original purpose of the report. In light of some of the questions that were asked early on about which option the town recommended. And prior to the discussions that our original member and I were part of I was certainly well aware of the fact that the town had selected option 2. However, the pressure within option 3 and the breakdown of 3A, B, and C were on the table prior to really any other discussion taking place. That's where the political pressure has been coming from certain sectors in the community. So I just want to put that on the table. There was really no discussion that I would consider to be significant on option 2. The discussions were all under option 3, specifically 3B and 3C. And just for the record, I supported 3B. I did raise a number of concerns.
You're freezing up a little bit online.
Can you still hear me? Just shake your head yes or no, Chair. Can you hear me?
I missed a little part of what you were saying.
Okay. At any rate, that's all. That's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to provide that clarification. And there will continue to be significant pressure for us all to accept 3C. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mary Easton, for your comments. I don't see any other hands up. I'm actually glad that we had the questions asked that we had asked. I think it's important. It's an important document. It's important to make these questions known at this time. Waiting until it's too late, I think it makes it tougher advocating for ourselves. So, I had to exchange some emails with Mr. Bruder earlier today, expressing my concerns about the projected numbers. I think we should, make sure that we project on more than less. I call it similar to building a school, anticipating growth, and then 5 years later having to build portables. We need to make sure that we are, assuming more than less, so that we don't find ourselves short. And I feel confident Mr. Bruder and his staff are acknowledging this based on my correspondence I had with him earlier today. So there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Reimer. Receive report PD-32-21 on the proposed draft policies for the Niagara Region official plan, and direct staff to forward comment and advice to the region, submission to the province, and direct staff to forward a copy of this report to the region, Niagara Region. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bernay?
Yes.
Councillor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Miklick?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Pachariva?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Rajima?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Thank you. And Mayor Easton?
Yes.
Thank you. That carries, Chair. Okay, thank you. We will now consider item 6.3.2, report PD-33-21 regarding draft revisions of garden suite policies. Mr. Bruder, would you care to speak to this item prior to any?
Sure, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is, we've had some garden suite applications come forward lately, and there's been some concerns identified with respect to how we regulate it, what our policy wording includes, and kind of the need to strike somewhat of a balance between providing a housing option, but at the same time ensuring that we're doing our part and adhering to, policies pertaining to preservation of agricultural viability, but as well adhering to, the temporary use nature of these types of land uses. So we've come up with some preliminary recommendations for you. Just strengthening the words a little bit with respect to how it needs to be temporary, modular, prefabricated or otherwise easily removed, being built on grade, and also even looking at a size threshold as well that's tied into the floor area of the principal dwelling or up to a maximum upset limit. So just an early report providing some early recommendations. The next step after this, should council want us to move forward, would be to go out for some public consultation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bruder. Do members of council have any questions regarding this report? Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Bruder, for the speed with which you and your department brought this forward. It really is quick to our discussion merely a few weeks ago. So, commend you for the work that you've done to get this in front of us. So I have a couple of questions. I'll start with one maybe of clarity. And that is item number 6 on page 3 of 5. It calls out the placement of the unit is not exclusively removed from the existing dwelling. And I wonder what that means. If you could speak to what you mean by not exclusively removed from the existing dwelling.
Bruder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What that really means is that's in our existing policy now. The intention of that is to keep all the building clustered together, so as you don't have, it further away that makes things such as access provision and even impacts to agricultural land more possible. So keeping it within the existing building cluster also helps to tie into the septic if needed and things like that. So that's where that was coming from.
Okay, and that makes some sense. It just had a ring to me, like, it could be part of the same building, but the way you explain it, it's more tying into the services that are available to the main building. Thank you for that. If I may, Mr. Chair, I have a question around, there's a lot of explanation and policy around the building itself. And I wonder if there's any direction that the province is giving municipalities on who would be in these buildings. Is it exclusive to family members? Is it a use that, in some municipalities, they're putting a garden suite out there and it is a rental unit, or how does that work?
Mr. Bruder.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't think there's any really hard and fast identification of who exactly needs to be in the garden suite. I can tell you, for most cases, typically the intention local municipalities have in mind is, for aging family, and some of them they talk about farm succession and things like that as well. Typically, the use is not meant to be some type of rental or anything like that. It's more to accommodate the ability for a family to age in place. And then in terms of provincial policy, really all it speaks to is the possibility of being able to accommodate a temporary use, but also just providing generally more housing choices and options. And that really seems to be a big focus, especially in the recent years.
Thank you for that, Mr. Bruder. And if I may, one more question, Mr. Chair, and it's with regards to the 20-year term. And obviously, a lot can happen in 20 years. And going in with the best of intentions initially to build a garden suite for let's say a family member, things can change fairly dramatically, especially, if we're talking about seniors and seniors, that their life changes and there are things that happen that seniors need to go into healthcare and things like that. And I'm just wondering about that 20-year time period, and wondering about, as I read it, it stated up to 20 years is the policy, the provincial policy. And I'm wondering if there isn't a sort of a good planning need for checking in on these these garden suites. Even if it was at 10 years, that we're just checking in on it, for the original intent of what the garden suite was. Now that if garden suites are open to be rental properties, then that probably nullifies my question, because that probably then opens up a whole other discussion around what a garden suite could be. And knowing that there is all kinds of rental opportunities on the market that may or may not be in our best interest. I think that could open it up. But I come back to, if we are to assume that it is a family member that does go into that, or family members, wouldn't it make sense for us to look at this as, a 10-year, not that we need to charge any more for it, but just a check on where are we at, 5 or 10 years down the road. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Bruder.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think that's something we can certainly look at. We do keep track of where the garden suites are. We have all the temporary use agreements on file. So to do those checkups, I don't think it would be all that onerous for staff. And you're right about the 20-year planning horizon. That is up to the max that you can allow these temporary use agreements. Some municipalities entertain less in certain circumstances, so there is the ability to work within that as well. But in terms of checkpoints, yeah, we can look at potentially working something like that into the process for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to ask Devan if you could help me out. Who is next?
Sure, I believe Councillor Deputy Mayor Rajima was next in the queue.
Deputy Mayor Rajima.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is expands a little bit on Councillor McPherson's question about the 10-year rule and the $5,000 deposit. So can you expand on what the $5,000 deposit is, what it's for? Because I think the last discussion we had, we sort of talked about it being an incentive to eventually take that property or take that building off the property. And so it no longer exists. It's only supposed to stay in place for 10 years or 20 years, be that as it may. Is that the point of the $5,000, or is it some sort of cost recovery? Because I think $5,000 in 20 years is going to buy you a hamburger and a newspaper and a oatmeal raisin cookie. That's about all you can buy with that in 20 years. So
let's hope, Mr.
For you, Mr. Chair, that is the intention of it. Is kind of, it acts kind of like as a security. So when we enter into the agreement, yeah, at the end of the day, that's a deposit. And should the individual or whomever has built the garden suite want their deposit back, they would have to demonstrate that, yeah, they've completed the terms of the temporary use agreement and complied with everything, being to either, as it stands with what we've currently been looking at garden suites through, either converting the building to a non-habitable use, i.e. no longer a garden suite, they turn into a barn or whatnot, or they remove it off the site altogether.
Okay, so if that's the intent, I don't see $5,000 as being a really good incentive, because again, 20 years, it's not, I don't think, going to be worth a lot. So have we looked at changing that? I mean, we don't want to make it, I think we need housing, so we don't want to make that more difficult. Do we, for people, if they want to put a garden suite on their property because their parents need assistance, we don't want to make it any more onerous on them than it already needs to be. But is that something that we're going to be looking at? Is that something that we considered, and we decide $5,000 is a good idea, or what did we decide?
Through you, Mr. Chair, quite honestly, that isn't something that we looked at changing, just for that exact reason. We're trying to achieve a balance here between, providing some regulation, making sure we adhere to policy requirements, but at the same time, not making it too difficult for individuals that need it to provide alternate housing options for members of the family or what have you. So I hadn't looked at changing that number. It doesn't mean we can't if it's council's pleasure, but to date, we thought 5,000 would remain something that could be kind of a good balance point ourselves.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to agree with you on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pachariva.
Thanks, Chair McLuck, and thank you very much. And I was going to go down the same lines as Councillor Majima. Like $5,000 isn't a whole incentive. Like when we're doing subdivisions, we're holding millions of dollars to make sure that the work is carried out. I mean, $5,000, you know, someone might keep that, right? That's as an incentive, like whether it's a function, like, and I think you've hit the nail on the head on page 4 of 5 about the shall be prefabricated or modular. It shall be built on grade. And I think that the portion of the, you know, the down payment or the holdback that we're going to keep in securities should be a function on the size of the property or the size of the structure or the cost of the structure. Like $5,000 on a $100,000 building is nothing if that's the case. So, and just to let you know too, in the first bullet point there, you left the D out of dwelling. So thank you very much, Mr. Bruder, for turning this around. You heard loud and clear what we were talking about at, you know, the meeting a couple of weeks ago. So I appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reimer, your hands up.
Thank you, Chair McLuck. And just echo earlier comments. Thank you to Director Bruder and staff for the quick turnaround. Great to see this before us already. I guess mine's more of a technical comment to on page 4 of 5, the 3 proposed enhancements. Just to the last one, through to Director Bruder. I'm just a little nervous about the wording of that built on grade, and I realize it's technical, but that can handcuff us. Been involved in the construction of quite a few of these similar dwellings, and usually the poorest land that we want to build this on, if we're going by land use policies, can have the poorest soils too. So I think if we say no footings, no walls, we're gonna cut a lot off of the handcuff a lot of people that way, and our own land use policies. I think we can word it. We can take some building code verbiage. I understand we're trying to accomplish here with the at grade, but that in construction practice, that, you know, if you go 4 feet down, you're below grade anyways. You're much cheaper to put walls up and backfill in the middle. So it's just, I realize it's a technical thing. I don't want to bore everybody with it, but I get nervous when I see shall not or shall be, especially in a case like this. So I think we can still achieve what we want to have with no basement, no, you know, nothing underneath it, and still not specify no footings. So just my one comment. Thank you very much, Chair McLeod.
Thank you, Councillor Reimer. Mr. Bruder, thinking that you've taken note of those comments.
I have, Councillor.
Okay, I do not see any further hands. Just based on that conversation, I'm just curious about this $5,000 number and some clarification on that. How did we come to that number? It's just an existing number? Do we know what other municipalities have charged, or how, you know, just, is that an appropriate amount? Is it too much? Is it not enough? Like, I'm not sure. I just clarification on what council's thoughts are. Or what's your interpretation of what council's saying?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Good comment. I think it's something that we can revisit. We could increase it a little bit. If you ask what other municipalities do, it's really all over the place. I've seen some that don't require a deposit at all. It's just a simple, some of them even permit some of these garden suites as of right. They have a little bit of, I understand though, some of these have a little bit of a different context in terms of what their agricultural area consists of compared to ours. But, you know, it's been in place and maybe Ms. Dale has some input on how we initially came to it, but it's been in place for quite some time now. And, you know, I think it's something we're totally open to exploring. I had just figured, you know, the $5,000, it's not necessarily meant to, it's not a security in case something goes wrong, like a subdivision security would be or something like that. It's just more a little bit of added incentive. If anybody, I know would say, they want their $5,000 back and they need to convert to a non-habitable, they probably would. They're going to have issues anyway because they're going to be no longer in compliance with the garden suite agreement. And then, if they have their dwelling there longer than that, still as a dwelling. So there's that too. There's that enforcement piece that they wouldn't be able to avoid regardless. So I just thought the 5,000 was an appropriate added incentive, but we can certainly review it. It's not something that I think we're completely, steadfast on. So definitely taking all these comments into consideration, and we can look at that.
Thank you. Councilor Deputy Mayor Jim, I see your hand is up again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just received a message that actually, all in all, about $15,000 is required for a garden suite, and that would, sorry, I'm just trying to find the details of what that encompasses. Town fees, region fees, NPCA, legal agreement, and the deposit. So it's not a cheap and easy thing to do. Thank you.
We'll be seeking public input on this in the future, pending passing this report, approval of this report. Not sure what the timelines will be. Will be in person, virtual. We don't know yet, given the government restrictions that we have currently. So we'll see how that goes. All right. I don't see any further hands up. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councilor Rinjema that Council receive and file for information report PD-33-21 regarding draft revisions of garden suite policies, and direct staff to prepare a recommendation report for committee and council consideration once appropriate public and agency consultation has been undertaken. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councilor Bernay?
Yes.
Councilor McPherson?
Yes.
Councilor Miklick?
Yes.
Councilor Pachariba?
Yes.
Councilor Reimer?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Rajima?
Yes.
Councilor Timmers?
Councilor Timmers?
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Easton?
Yes.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you. There being no additional reports to consider for the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda, we have now concluded the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. We will now rotate to allow Councillor and Chair J.D. Pachariba to assume the role of Chair at this time for the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda.
Thank you, Chair McCulloch. There are no registered delegations this evening for the Community Service and Infrastructure Committee agenda. So we're going into 7.2 consent agenda. We're now going to consider the consent agenda items inclusive of item 7.2.1 age-friendly citizen advisory committee minutes of April 1st, 2021, and item 7.2.2 the museum citizen advisory committee minutes of May 20th, 2021. Would any member of committee like to remove these items from the consent agenda to discuss? Councilor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Museum Advisory Committee minutes, if I may, if I could raise that. And it's a fairly simple question that I have, and that is with regards to on page 4 of the minutes, which is page 299 of our agenda. There is a comment with regards to the opening to the public and the hours and days of being open. And in the report, we've got 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Thursday and 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Friday. My question is, are we planning to open on the weekends? Or is this just a schedule in the soft opening, if you will?
Okay, so Devan, who's on from Community Services that might be able to field this? I think it's got something to do with us being in a pandemic, and we're going to add. I don't want to be so bold as to say that because I'm not staff, but Curious George, I'm looking to you for a little direction.
No problem. Thank you through you, Chair. We don't have the director here tonight. However, it is my understanding that that is the soft opening hours currently, and that they will be revisiting those hours at a later date once we get a flow to the Museum and Cultural Center.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just, when I read it, it hit me kind of right between the eyes to say, okay, we're going to get the museum open this summer. And when we are trying to drive, new visitors to this facility, it looks like we're not opening when our visitors are going to be here. So I would maybe put it back to the Director of Community Services to clarify when would we anticipate being open Saturdays and Sundays. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You are welcome, Counselor, and rest assured you'll be able to visit Saturday and Sunday down there and wander down from the lofty perches of the Elgin Estates where you are. So there be no further discussion. I have a motion moved by Counselor Timmers. The council receive and file for information the consent agenda inclusive of item 7.2.1 age-friendly citizen advisory committee minutes of April 1st, 2021. And item 7.2.2 Museum Citizen Advisory Committee minutes of May 20th, 2021. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bernay,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Miklik,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariba,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Regina,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers.
Yes.
Thank you. And Mayor Easton.
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Excellent, Devan. Thank you very much. So we're now going to dive into the report. So 7.3. Our first one is 7.3.1 report FS 04-21 regarding the fire route bylaw update. Our Deputy Fire Chief, Bill Blake, will speak to this report. Bill, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks, Chair Pachariba. Good evening, everyone. This report is seeking authorization to update the current fire route bylaw enacted by Council back in 2017. Due to the significant growth within the community since this time, we're looking for approval to update Schedule A, which is the detailed list of fire routes within the town. In addition, we're looking to add a few different sign styles and spacing requirements to address a number of enforcement and operational challenges we've been working through internally with Public Works and bylaw. And the last part of the report in the request through Council is this proposed bylaw would delegate council authority to the fire chief to update designated fire routes as the town continues to grow. This would be the fire routes that are created accordingly with the growth, and additions to Schedule A can continue and be updated.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Blake. Any members of committee have any questions for the deputy? And I see Chief Hudson has joined us too to make sure Bill did a good job. Chief, I would say awesome. Okay. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Michalak. The council receive and file for information report FS 04-21 regarding the fire route bylaw and enact and pass an update and revised bylaw to designate fire routes on certain lands and properties in the town of Lincoln. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bernay, Councillor Bernay.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Miklik,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariba,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Regina,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
and Mayor Easton.
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you, Devan. We will now consider our second report this evening, 7.3.2 report PW 21-21 regarding First Avenue Water Main Replacement and Road Reconstruction Project Award. Councillor McPherson and Councillor Michalek, you're happy to see this. You moved this at budget. So Councillor McPherson, the floor is yours. You're grinning like the Cheshire Cat, but go ahead,
thank
my
you.
friend.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be very brief. And I just wanted to thank the director, Director Graham, for leading this charge to get this in front of us and also to get it in front of us with a savings to the budget, which is equally as exciting. So the good residents of First Ave have been pushing hard to see their road repaired. So we're going to do them one better and do the water and also the road. And again, thank you to the Public Works folks for jumping on this, as it was an add to the budget last December, January. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome, Councillor McPherson. Councillor Michalek.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. Just also want to thank the residents for their patience with this and their understanding that, you know, you don't want to replace underground infrastructure prematurely until it's past its life cycle. And the road may have been deteriorated for a while. However, you know, trying to get as much out of what's underground as possible, I think, is important as well. And just thankful that both is being done at the same time. Thank you.
Excellent. So I see no further discussion. I have a motion moved by Councillor McPherson that Council receive and file for information report PW-21-21 regarding the First Avenue Water Main Replacement and Road Reconstruction Project Award, and approve the contract award for the First Avenue Water Main Replacement and Road Reconstruction Project tender to Catalina Excavating, Inc. for the amount $1,033,896, and approve the mayor and town clerk to sign and seal the contract documents on behalf of the municipality. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call it the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bernay,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Michalek,
Yes.
Councillor Patriva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton. Thank you. That carries.
Thank you, Devan. There being no additional reports to consider for the Community Service and Infrastructure Committee agenda this evening, we've now concluded that section of our agenda. We will now rotate to allow Councillor and Chair Paul McPherson to assume the chair at this time for the general business and finance agenda. Chair McPherson.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. So delegations, there are no registered delegations this evening for the General Business and Finance Committee agenda. We move to the consent agenda. We are now considering item 8.2, the consent agenda, inclusive of item 8.2.1, the Lincoln Public Library Board Minutes of May 18th, 2021. Would any member of council like to remove this item from the consent agenda to discuss? Seeing none, there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Bernay that council receive and file for information the consent agenda inclusive of item 8.2.1 Lincoln Public Library Board Minutes of May 18th, 2021. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote. Devan, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bernay,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Michalek,
Yes.
Councillor Patriva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
and Mayor Easton.
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you. There are no reports for consideration this evening for the General Business and Finance Committee. Moving to item 9, confidential items. There are no confidential items. Item 10 is committee remarks. Do any of our committee have remarks this evening? Seeing none, we move to adjournment. There being no further business, I call this meeting adjourned at 7:20 p.m.
Night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
All right, thank you.